Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing ahmetrasay in a 15 plus 10 game. No, let me say that again. Hey guys, this is John. I'm playing ahmetrasay in a 15 plus 2 game on leechess.org. There we go. So I messed up my intro. It happens occasionally. Yeah, still getting used to this time control, playing with a 2-second increment, and also playing the majority of my standard games on leechess these days. Okay, so ahmetrasay plays knight f6 on move 2. This is the so-called martial defense. It's a little bit dubious because black cannot recapture with the pawn in the center. And here I'm just going to develop and attack the queen. So it's a bit baffling that a 2,000 rated player would play like this, because this line is just known to be not that great for black. Queen a5. Okay, so I can play knight f3 and just develop. I can play bishop d2. I'm kind of leaning towards bishop d2. I wonder if they could play e5 then. Knight f3 is perhaps the slightly safer move. Let's do that. Just rule out e5. I can still play bishop d2 coming up. Yeah, c6, and e4 would be a blunder, mind you, because of knight takes e4. So maybe first play this bishop move simply to enable pawn to e4. So let's do that. Bishop out to g4. So I could play queen b3 and hit that pawn on b7. I could also just go ahead and play e4. If e4, maybe queen b6, setting up the threat of bishop takes f3 and queen takes d4. I don't know that black can justify going pawn hunting this early, but I should be aware that queen b6 would be a double attack on b2 and d4. Still, I mean, hard to believe that e4, queen b6, e5, something like that would not be good here. If e3, maybe e5 all the same. And then if d takes e5, bishop takes f3, something to that effect. Yeah, I'm going to play e4. If they play queen b6, then so be it. I think I'll get an initiative. They play e6 instead. So preparing to bring the bishop out. h3 is tempting just to kick this guy and see if I can get black to take on f3. Just a developing move like bishop c4 is also tempting. Clearly, I'd want to look at knight discoveries, but I didn't see any good ones. This is similar to a Scandinavian in the sense that you can play moves like knight d5. The queen will just go back to d8 if I do that. Same thing with knight b5. Black will play queen d8. Bishop e2 seems fairly normal. Bishop e2 takes the sting out of the pin. I kind of want the bishop on d3, though. I'm just thinking an eventual e5 would be nice with the bishop on d3, opening up its diagonal. Yeah, maybe bishop d3. But then, if I later play h3, bishop h5, the pin will still exist on my queen. It's the only thing I'm a little worried about. If bishop e2, bishop b4, I can just castle without worrying about bishop takes c3, because bishop takes c3 would come with tempo. Yeah, let's play bishop e2 instead. I'm also thinking black might swing their queen over to h5, so it is probably helpful to have an extra defender on the f3 knight. Lasker01, an E player, both in the chat. Lasker01 was a opponent I had recently, and if you watch my bullet videos, you'll know who E player is. How's it going, Trevor? Okay, knight bd7 was played. I'm thinking about h3, just putting the question to the bishop. I'm also thinking about castling. Maybe slight preference for h3 as it stands now. Yeah, let's do that. Just ask them what they want to do. I'm going to pre-move this capture. Black decides to keep the bishop, bishop h5. So I could try to play g4 and start pawn storming, but after g4, bishop g6, I would have to tend to this pawn. Another line I can think about here is knight d5, queen d8, knight f4, if I really want to win this light square bishop. It's a semi-attractive line, but I think I lose the e4 pawn if I do that. Yeah. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to castle. One thing that black often runs into in the Scandinavian is when they have the queen on a5 and they're kind of playing daredevil with this. Yeah, like if they commit their bishop here, like now knight d5 becomes more of an option because I can go after that bishop. So if I play knight d5 here, queen d8, knight takes e6, or knight takes e7 rather, my knight is trapped. I wonder if they could play knight takes e4, but I do have knight takes c6 at the very least. That would be such a weird thing to be afraid of here. I also have g4. g4 would just do the trick, wouldn't it? Yeah, so I think I'm going to play knight d5 right now and go after that dark square bishop. Unless I see something else that's really strong. But what else could I do? Queen b3 maybe? Queen b3 could always be met by queen b6. I could try to blow up the center with d5. That's intriguing. They may close it down with e5. d5, e5. So knight d5, queen d8, knight takes e7, queen takes e7. Let's say queen c2. I'm probably better there, but it's maybe not a huge edge. Maybe I should wait on knight d5 until after they castle. Presumably, I'll still have that move if I want it. Maybe it's better just to make some useful move here, like a3 or rook c1. a3 is kind of tempting because then I could maybe stick a bishop on b4 eventually. Okay, let's try this. So at first I was pretty convinced I was going to play knight d5, but I'm changing my mind a little bit. Black goes back to c7. Okay, now rook c1 seems like an easy move to play. Lining up against their queen. Creating an uncomfortable situation here. I feel like this happens a lot in my games where I talk about bringing a rook to a file that's on the same file as the opponent's queen. And even though there's traffic in the way, I like this theme because it creates a lot of threats and it's uncomfortable for your opponent. My opponent has only used 1 minute so far on their clock. I have used over 5. No major plans for the weekend. Probably going to go out on Saturday with some friends in Minneapolis. I'm also doing my taxes this weekend. Real exciting stuff. Has to be done though, right? Got to pay Uncle Sam. Okay, so castles and... So e5 would hit the knight, and then if knight d5 I could take, and they would have to take with the e-pawn. Is that much of a victory? I don't know. I'm torn about that. d5 is a breakthrough move that is looking pretty good, but black doesn't have to react to it. I'm also thinking about g4, bishop g6, and then maybe bishop d3 or something, but not quite feeling that line. I would say e5 is the normal move right now, but e5, knight d5, knight takes, e takes. What's really going on there? I don't see how I exploit the pin so easily in that case. Maybe b4. b4 followed by queen b3 is a better treatment of this position. Let's do that. So expanding on the queen side. I'd like to play the queen to b3, but I think it's better if I have the b pawn in front when I do so. If bishop back to g6, I'm considering bishop d3. It may be in my best interest to have the rook on e1. Okay, they play a5. Thought that might be possible. I'm thinking about queen b3 once again. Queen b3, a takes b4, a takes b4. I have an isolated pawn. Queen b6 would attack it, but knight a4 would attack their queen. Maybe they play queen a7 then. If I take a5, they're going to play bishop takes a3, I believe is their idea. Although then I have knight b5, don't I? That's interesting. Maybe I can actually take this pawn. Take, rook takes, knight b5 or d5. Maybe I win in exchange. It's not so clear-cut, though. E takes d5, bishop takes a5. Nah, they win two minor pieces in that case. So if b takes a5, rook takes a5, knight b5, then rook takes b5, bishop takes b5. They can win some pawns, though. That line's a little weird. Okay, I'm going to take, because I see some potential traps. Like, if takes, bishop takes, knight b5 just wins material. No question about it. And I think rook takes is going to make them somewhat nervous, and I'm thinking about just playing a4 and not even doing a discovered attack in that case quite yet. If queen takes, then I assume knight here. Okay, so they just chop the pawn, and I think they're going to run into this move now. Let me just double check. But yeah, because the point is they don't have queen takes a5, my bishop is covering, and this is just a fork on the queen and the bishop. I think I win a full piece. They have to move their queen, and then we're taking a3 and proceeding from there. Wow, they're going to give up their queen, actually. Okay, so take that. If they take d2, we can take a8. I guess their argument will be that my knight is trapped at the end of this line. So knight takes a8, bishop takes a5. Even if I lose the knight, I've got a lot of material for the queen, don't I? Might just be better to take here, but then they can move their rook, and this knight will be trapped as well. But I have e5, potentially. Okay, so what if I play knight takes d2 here? And then after bishop takes e2, queen takes e2, they have to move the rook. Let's say rook takes a5 or rook c8. I can play e5 in both cases, and wherever that knight goes, I get to trade it. So that's a nice little situation. I could also just take that rook. So knight takes a8, bishop takes a5. Yeah, even if they win that knight, they would have, what, not very much material for the queen. 2 minor pieces for the queen, is that right? I believe so. So knight takes a8 may be more clear-cut. Knight takes a8, bishop takes a5. Let's say queen b3. Looks pretty good. Attacking b7. They could play b5. Huh. I can pull my queen back to c2, maybe hitting that c6 pawn. It's not totally over in that case. And this knight takes d2 line. So knight takes d2, bishop takes e2, queen takes e2, rook takes a5, let's say. e5. Knight d5, knight takes d5, rook takes d5. They have a rook for the queen in that case. A rook plus, what, a pawn? So 6 points versus 9. It's a lot to keep track of. But that's the lay of the land when all these exchanges occur. So I have 2 lines. They look almost equivalent, to be honest. Knight takes a8 or knight takes d2. There's also queen takes d2. I was taking with the knight because that would protect e4, but queen takes d2 protects a5. And if queen takes d2, knight takes e4, I have queen f4, which has got to be good. Could this move be best? It might be. Yeah, and my queen can always come to f4 if I need to support that knight. This looks weird, but I think I'm going to do this one. Just take back, guard this pawn. I know I spent some time there, but this is a potential pivotal moment in the game, just trying to close black out, give them the least amount of chances possible. So rook does come to c8, so I can play queen f4 or e5 here. If e5, they're going to play knight e4. And then I can play queen, let's say e3, bishop g6 maybe, knight at h4. Yeah, their knight is as good as dead in that case. Queen f4, while playable, is a bit passive. And I would like to not have my queen defending the knight. So e5, knight e4, queen e3 on the other hand. I don't see them emerging safely with the knight. Yeah, let's do that. Because if they go here or here, of course, we can trade it. Knight takes d5 or knight takes e8, so I think this is the only relevant move. If bishop takes f3, and again, we're dominating that knight. Played too quickly by black. Bishop takes a3, just hands the game to white. Despite the opening, they weren't doing so bad at that point. I mean, white was probably somewhat better, but black had a solid-ish position. Like they were making it work. So yeah, we're going to come here and just ask them how they're going to defend the knight. If they try to prop up the knight with f5, then they lose e6. Is one issue. I mean, I also can probably take en passant, but e6 would be lost. So I'm expecting bishop g6, after which this knight h4 move. Okay, so they do play that. Probably knight takes e6 right away is easiest. We're getting out with the knight, and we're hitting the rook. Yeah, let's do that. So escaping with this piece. If rook e8, probably knight f4. Knight c5 also looks good. Or bishop c4. Bishop c4 maybe even the strongest of all. They could play rook e8, bishop c4, bishop f7 perhaps. It's a familiar story. They play the opening way too fast. They make a rash tactical decision, then they lose material, and now they're trying to work their way out of it, but it's not going to happen. So, okay, so here actually I saw the line. I'm seeing the line now. Knight f4, bishop f7, and then e6. And if bishop takes e6, knight takes e6, rook takes e6, we have bishop c4 at the end. I like the look of that, so I'm going to go for that. This knight is still lacking squares to go to. Even though I can't attack it with like a pawn, it's pretty much doomed. Yeah, so let's do this. Now rook takes bishop c4 is really going to be the end of it pretty soon. Attacking that pin piece. Maybe even queen b3 if I want. Yeah, so black resigned. Okay, so this martial defense, looking at the opening, with knight f6, I analyzed this on Chessable recently in my d4 repertoire. It's considered dubious because when white takes on d5, black cannot recapture with a pawn. And that's a fundamental realization, but I've seen this occasionally in blitz and stuff at slightly higher levels, like 2000-ish, like this opponent. And I think it's worth repeating that this line isn't good because you need a pawn anchor in the center. If you're playing d4, d5, you're trying to build your play around the d5 pawn, or you're trying to take on c4 at the right moment. And hence why, after d4, d5, aside from the Queen's Gambit accepted, c6 and e6 are pretty much the only other truly respected responses. I mean, you've got random other stuff like the Albin counter gambit, but c6 and e6 are always going to be main lines because they both prop up the pawn on d5. But after knight f6 takes, you don't have that pawn foothold in the center. Now, my opponent took with the queen. This would be like you could consider this a poor man's Scandinavian because white has good chances to establish two pawns in the center. The e and the d pawns survive. Compared to a Scandinavian where e4, I guess I can't make moves here until I go to the analysis board, but e4, d5, e takes d5, queen takes d5, at least there black can say that they've destroyed one of white's center pawns for the cost of having dragged their queen to the center. But in this martial defense, the e and the d pawns remain, and white can look forward to establishing a big center with pawns on e4, d4. So, a couple things that I'll look at in the analysis. Maybe right around here, if I played it correctly, like dealing with bishop g4. I sort of feel like I might have played e4 too quickly. Knight e5 is a move I probably should have looked at. I don't think I did. Attacking the bishop. I did spend a little time. I was slightly hesitant, like how best to deploy my pieces. Right here, I thought about playing knight d5 with the discovery on the black queen and hitting the bishop. But after queen d8, knight takes e7, queen takes e7, I would have to defend my e4 pawn. And it seemed to me like I had knight d5 anyways on the next move, so ultimately I decided not to rush that decision. Yeah, and here a5, b takes a5 is interesting. My first instinct was to play queen b3 and just defend the b pawn, but then I started thinking, how vulnerable are these pawns really? Because if black plays the move they played in the game, they get hit with knight b5 due to the pin on the c-file. Queen takes a5 is running into knight d5, queen d8, knight takes e7, queen takes e7, and then I think bishop b4. That's one of the virtues of having the pawn on a3. And black would have to play c5 there. Pawn takes c5. Looks very bad for them, with c6 being a threat. Rook takes a5 might be best. And I don't think I have a good discovery. Knight b5 maybe then, but rook takes b5, bishop takes b5. I have two pawns hanging. I thought black might be able to get some compensation there. So on rook takes a5, I might have just played a4 and kept my two center pawns intact, and also just save the a pawn. Although I guess even there, after rook takes a5, this is still not a threat due to knight b5. Maybe some complicating factors, but I'll look at that moment. And after this, the bishop takes d2 move did present me with a choice. We've seen this before in a game I had as well against the Llama Lord, where you have multiple moves that look promising in a good position. So here I was looking at knight takes a8, knight takes d2, and queen takes d2, which is the move I ultimately played. First line I looked at was knight takes a8. I rejected that ultimately because of bishop takes a5 with rook takes a8 to come. I think that's still good for white, but then I started looking more closely at knight takes d2, which probably is okay. I just didn't want to lose the a5 pawn, and that's why I chose this one. Yeah, and I think after this, it's pretty much a cleanup operation. Here, if bishop g6, knight h4 is going to win this knight. So let's go to the analysis board now. 1 inaccuracy, 1 mistake, 0 blunders for a 17 average centipawn loss for me. 1 inaccuracy, 4 mistakes, 1 blunder for a 58 average centipawn loss for my opponent. So, all right, let's go to the analysis then. Yeah, bishop d2, bishop g4. The engine says play, okay, it's giving multiple moves. e3, e4, or knight e5. It seems to approve of e4. I probably won't bother using the opening book. You can see it's loading right now. Interestingly, there is one game in this line to have reached this position, but it's a pretty offbeat and just generally known to be bad opening. So, I mean, you can use the opening book, but just common sense should dictate that white must be better here with the two center pawns and gaining time against black's queen. So, yeah, e4. And in this one game, black played queen b6, interestingly enough. And white has almost a +1 advantage according to the computer. This is how it went. Knight a4, queen c7, bishop d3. Yeah, white is developing comfortably. So my opponent instead played e6. Yeah, so if queen b6, e5 does look like a good reply. So e6, bishop e2. Here I thought about playing bishop d3. The engine wants to go knight d5 instead. And then queen d8. Knight takes f6. What if queen takes? Queen b3 hitting the b pawn. So trying to strike here when queen b6 is not playable for black in reply. So I could have considered knight d5 right away. I was more so looking to hold off on that move, but I can see why the engine likes that. Again, a parallel to the Scandinavian. That happens in that opening too. Knight d5 attacking the queen. So as played, bishop e2. Again, queen b6 is preferred by the engine. Then it says my best move is bishop c1 or queen a4. Both moves designed to defend the d pawn, I assume. Yeah, queen b6 could have been a little awkward, I admit. Bishop c1 looks like a concession, but I see the point. It defends the D pawn and the B pawn. And we are ready to castle. So knight bd7, h3. And here, much better for black to take on f3, apparently. And then play queen b6 again. So it does seem like black's best chances were connected to this move, just trying to annoy me with the double attack. So as played, bishop h5, I just castled. g4 is a suggestion. Bishop g6, and now g5. I might have missed that g5 was possible. Point being that knight takes e4 can't be played because of this with the attack. So that was an alternative to castling. And here I played a3. Yeah, I think safe to say my play could have been improved shortly after the opening. Like maybe from move 7 to probably right around here. Move 7 to 12. That 5 or 6 moves, I bet I could have played better. Like this line with g4 is more aggressive and probably a better way to punish black if I'm truly going to do that. But castling and just sitting on my pawn center is nice too. Here the engine still wants to go g4 and probably follow with g5. But I played a3. So what about knight d5? That was a move I was wondering about. Queen d8. Knight takes e7. Queen takes. Queen c2, just defending this pawn. It's cramped for black, and they don't have the bishop pair, but it's not terrible. Yeah, this is looking reasonable for them. But that's another way of playing. So I played a3. They played queen c7. Rook c1 seemed natural here, lining up with the queen. Castles. And now b4, which the engine does not like so much. It says played bishop e3. So often it wants to move this dark square bishop. It is misplaced on d2, I agree. If I could teleport it over to like g3, that would be nice. And attack the queen. So b4, and here black is not doing terribly if they play bishop g6, attacking the pawn. Bishop d3, a5. It looks like a Slav setup for black. So yeah, probably not bad. Instead they played a5 and I took. But here again, after this capture, it's almost equal. Only plus 0.2. And rook takes a5 could be played. And a4 is the correct reply. Okay, so it seems I was correct about that. Because this move does walk into discoveries, like knight b5 is possible, but I'm not sure about this line, even though we win in exchange. This pawn and this pawn are hanging. Yeah, knight takes e4, and black is slightly better according to the computer. They have a compact structure, and I've got weaknesses. I've gone through a lot of trouble just to win the exchange. As played, however, this is the game. Bishop takes a3, big blunder. Knight b5. Best is to move the queen away and just give up the bishop, but +3 if that happens. Okay, now here, this was a major decision, which way to capture, either on d2 or on a8. Yeah, so it looks like I made the right call. Queen takes d2. Let's just compare. So this is plus 5.3. If I play knight takes a8, bishop takes a5, this is +4. Still good, but the fact that this knight is going to perish is going to give black something. And also, I thought on knight takes d2, we would have a trade, and then they would take on a5, maybe. So rook takes a5. This is +4, roughly. Yeah, here, knight d5, swap. Take. And I'm up a rook. Or, sorry, a queen for a rook. Black has one pawn, but winning for white. So queen takes d2, rook c8. And I played e5. Queen f4, slightly better, but e5 seemed more forcing. Maybe it doesn't like it as much because black could do this and win a pawn, and I would still have some work left to do. To convert. Yeah, now f5 loses the e6 pawn in the game. We're far too ahead at this point. Nothing is going to save black. So, a bit of an abbreviated game here. Just can't play this recklessly. Yeah, it's if you if you do this sort of thing, you play the opening too fast, you're going to have to deal with the results that you earn, because bishop takes a3, you had plenty of time, ahmetrasay, to avoid making that blunder, but you just didn't put it to use. So, yeah, I mean, people can play how they wish, but if you do this, just know that you're never going to get that much better. Like, you're going to get the same type of results, and you're not achieving your full chess potential by playing fast in the opening and then trying to repair the damage when you get in a bad position. So, from my perspective, yeah, I could have played this a bit better. I think I should have looked more into the plans involving h3 and g4. Now that I see that on the engine display, that makes a lot of sense. I'm also wondering how the game would have played out differently had black actually played queen b6 and tried to attack me here and here. Because if black is going to make this line work at all, I feel like they have to be a pest and go after the b and the d pawns maybe. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this game, and I'll be back soon with another video. Talk to you guys later. Bye.